1990s, Colombia was one of the most dangerous places in the world to be involved in politics. The country was trapped in a cycle of violence involving guerrilla groups, right-wing paramilitary organizations, drug cartels, and state security forces. During that decade alone, historians estimate that between 20,000 and 30,000 Colombians died in politically motivated violence. Among those victims was Senator Manuel Cepeda Vargas. What occurred to him on August 9th, 1994, became one of the most infamous political dramas in Colombian history and a symbol of violence that devastated an entire generation of political activists. This is the story of Manuel Cepeda. So, why it's important to know about this, as an American citizen especially, you learn that this country has been filled with drugs for so many years. Miami, its downtown, was built through drug trafficking. That's how most buildings were funded. And most of the drugs, cocaine in particular, came from Colombia. Therefore, it was the US government fighting the drug wars, and the Colombian government taking part as well. With Pablo Escobar, the most infamous drug trafficker in history, a whole drug lord. He was Colombian. Because of him, there was so much violence in the country, and the violence would nearly spread to the United States of America. This senator was a politician back then. Manuel Cepeda Vargas was born in Colombia and became involved in politics at a young age. During his youth, he joined the Colombian Communist Party and became heavily involved in political organizing. One of his major projects was a community youth program known as JUCO, which sought to educate and involve young people in politics. His activism quickly attracted the attention of authorities. He basically did what Charlie Kirk did, teach the youth politics, but instead of conservative views, Cepeda would teach communist views. It was good communism, though, healthy communism, working together, supporting one another. Unfortunately, many fascist leaders have not done that, and we have not seen the first super successful and pleasant communist organization being effective in the government. During a period of political repression, Cepeda was detained by the Colombian government and incarcerated in Bogotá's infamous La Modelo prison. While imprisoned, he wrote a book titled Vencerás, Marquetalia. Translated into English, You Are Overcome, Marquetalia. The title referenced Marquetalia, a rural communist guerrilla movement that had become a symbol of resistance among left-wing activists. Through his writing, Cepeda encouraged supporters to continue their struggle and maintain hope that peace would eventually arrive. He was basically a political prisoner captured during a rally against the government. After spending approximately a year as a political prisoner, he was released in 1965 when overcrowding within prison facilities forced the government to have to free some inmates. Cepeda was one of them. They had to let him go in order to open up space for new prisoners. His wife, Yira Castro, was also active in left-wing politics. After attending a communist conference in Havana, Cuba, she too was imprisoned by the Colombian government and sent to the El Buen Pastor prison in Bogotá. She was eventually released, but the pressure on the family continued. Soon after, Manuel Cepeda and his family were forced to escape the country. The family relocated to Czechoslovakia before later moving to Cuba, where Cepeda continued his political activities. Political changes in Colombia eventually allowed the family to return in 1970. Upon returning, Cepeda resumed his work in politics and legal advocacy, focusing on organizations and causes connected to the liberal political left. He also introduced his children to politics from an early age. Tragedy struck the family again in 1981. On July 9th of that year, Cepeda's wife, Yida Castro, died from a brain tumor in Bogotá at only 39 years old. She had built a career as both a politician and journalist. Despite personal losses and years of political persecution, Manuel Cepeda continued his public career. In 1992, he became Secretary General of the Colombian Communist Party. He would later serve as a senator of the Republic. His influence on Colombian politics extended beyond his own career. His daughter, Maria Cepeda Castro, became a political journalist. His son, Iván Cepeda, entered politics and eventually became a senator himself, just like his father. Decades later, to this day, Iván would emerge as a major national political figure, enrolling in the presidential elections as a candidate. That election will determine whether he becomes the next president of Colombia. His opponent is one corrupt individual, Abelardo, who Trump has been endorsing. And whoever wins these Colombian elections will have to meet with Trump in Washington, D.C. at the White House to discuss the ongoing drug wars. And in fact, Iván Cepeda, as well as the current president, Gustavo Petro, who supports him, has really shown support towards organizations, oppressed organizations and communities such as the LGBT community. Thanks to these beautiful people, trans females can use a female restroom and the trans men can use the male restroom. That's how it should be, liberty. Happy Pride Month, by the way. Now let's get back to the story. By the early 1990s, Colombia was descending deeper into violence. The Patriotic Union, known as the UP, had been formed during peace negotiations in the 1980s. The party attempted to create a democratic path for left-wing political participation. Instead, thousands of its members became targets. Presidential candidates, congressmen, mayors, council members, activists, organizers, and supporters were systemically murdered. Human rights organizations and later court rulings would describe what happened as political persecution on a massive scale. Manuel Cepeda became one of the final national leaders of the Patriotic Union. That position placed him in an extraordinary danger. According to reports, he received repeated death threats in the years leading up to his assassination. On the morning of August 9th, 1994, Senator Manuel Cepeda left his home and headed towards Colombia's Congress. He was traveling through Bogotá, near Avenida de las Américas in the Mandalay neighborhood, only a short distance from where he lived. He was heading to work. At the time, Cepeda was preparing to participate in discussions concerning international humanitarian law and the protection of civilians during Colombia's armed conflict. As he drove through the Kennedy district, a motorcycle carrying two young men intercepted his vehicle, getting in the way. The passenger of that motorcycle fired. Cepeda was struck multiple times. The attack was swift and carefully executed. He died before receiving effective medical treatment. Investigators later confirmed his identity through official identification procedures conducted by the Bogotá Forensics Office. The murder immediately shocked Colombia, but for many observers, it was also tragically familiar. Another prominent member of the Patriotic Union had been eliminated. As investigators dug deeper into this homicide, evidence began pointing toward a broader conspiracy. Investigations eventually linked the murder to paramilitary organizations working alongside members of the Colombian military. Former paramilitary commanders later acknowledged that Cepeda's killing was part of a larger campaign targeting Patriotic Union members. These former commanders described cooperation between paramilitary groups and certain military intelligence units. Investigators examined phone communications, radio traffic, surveillance records, movement tracking, insider testimony from demobilized fighters, and patterns similar to other attacks against UP members. According to court findings, elements within paramilitary intelligence and military intelligence monitored Cepeda's movements and shared information with those paramilitary collaborators. Among those eventually tied to the investigation were retired military officers Hernando Medina and Justo Gil Zúñiga. Human Rights Watch and other organizations argued that additional suspects were involved and that the assassination was politically motivated. A letter sent to the Colombian president, Andrés Pastrana, highlighted concerns regarding the scope of the investigation and called attention to additional individuals who had allegedly participated in planning and facilitating the crime. Investigators also examined the role of General Rodolfo Herrera Luna, who had been identified by some sources as a superior officer connected to individuals implicated in this shooting. However, by the time his name was linked to the investigation, he had already passed away. He was an older man with health issues. According to testimony gathered during the investigation, support for the operation allegedly came from prominent paramilitary figures, Fidel Castaño and Carlos Castaño Gil. Investigators also identified several alleged assassins from Medellin, including Edison Jimenez, known as El Ñato, Fabio Usman, known as El Candelillo, and Pionono Franco Bedoya. Evidence cited by investigators included witness testimony, ballistic analysis, intelligence records, and statements from former participants in Colombia's armed conflict. On October 20th, 1997, formal charges moved forward against the two military officers connected. Human rights lawyer Alvaer Restrepo charged each paramilitary officer with aggravated homicide, assigning two of his assistants to prosecute from this point on. Alirio Uribe Munoz and Rafael Barrios Civil. They played important roles in pursuing accountability. Rather than appearing for a traditional arraignment, defense attorney Juan Antonio Benavides entered not guilty pleas on behalf of the two accused officers, Medina and Zúñiga. This defense attorney was privately hired. The two suspects would remain free, awaiting legal proceedings. They never even got an arraignment to decide on their custody. Their proceedings would be held at the Palo Quemao Judicial Complex in Bogotá, where they were summoned. On March 16, 1998, proceedings formally began. Instead of a conventional courtroom trial with continuous witness testimony, the process focused heavily on the submission and evaluation of documentary evidence and investigative materials. Judge Sergio Izazavilla reviewed the evidence over an extended period. On December 16, 1999, Judge Izazavilla announced his decision. Both officers were guilty of aggravated homicide. Each immediately received a sentence of 43 years in prison. Following the verdict, they were remanded into custody. However, rather than being sent to a traditional prison facility, they were confined at a reclusion center of the 9th Brigade military base in Neiva, Colombia, a decision that drew criticism from human rights advocates. Instead of being in a prison like most criminals in the country, they were put in a comfortable military facility, which it's called military prison, but they were not treated like traditional criminals. They were treated very well and lived very comfortably despite having murdered someone. The officers still appealed immediately that day from the base. On January 18th, 2001, the Superior Tribunal of Bogotá upheld the convictions but reduced the sentences to 28 years. Both officers were not satisfied with the change and appealed again. On November 10th, 2004, Colombia Supreme Court rejected a habeas corpus petition challenging the convictions. This Bogota Supreme Court confirmed once again the guilty verdicts and confirmed the 28-year prison sentence. But despite those rulings, neither officer served the full sentence. Zuniga was released on March 31st, 2006, and Camacho on May 14th, 2007. They served about 10 years in prison in this comfortable military prison. But the legal battle did not end there. In 2010, the Inter-American Court of Human Rights ruled that the Colombian state had violated Manuel Cepeda's rights. Out of the 8 suspects, one could not be charged because he was dead, but only 2 of them were charged. The 2 officers we just covered. There were 5 others that were still alive, roaming the streets, and nothing happened to them. The system ignored their crimes. The Human Rights Court concluded that Colombia had failed adequately to protect Manuel Cepeda and had mishandled aspects of the investigation that followed his murder. The court ordered reparations for his family. The ruling transformed the process into an international symbol of political violence, state responsibility, and impunity. More than 3 decades after his assassination, Manuel Cepeda remains one of the most recognized victims of political violence in Colombia. His death became a symbol of the campaign against Patriotic Union and of the broader conflict that claimed thousands of lives. Today, his legacy continues through his family. His daughter remains active in journalism. His son continues to play a prominent role in Colombian politics, and as well American politics. The story of Manuel Cepeda is not only the story of one senator, it is the story of a national struggling during periods of war, political persecution, and violence. The long search for justice that followed. Thank you for listening to Strawberry Ink. If you found this episode informative, be sure to subscribe to Strawberry Ink YouTube channel, follow the show, leave a comment, and share this story so that history of political violence is not forgotten. I am your host, Santiago Gabriel, and I'll see you next time. Have a good rest of your day and happy Pride Month. Love is love.